Thank you. Thank you. It's very nice to be here this evening. I've never passed up a chance to talk to young people. You get the bill for all that we've been doing, so you better pay attention, which is always disturbing, not only to me, but to so many others. But I was pleasantly surprised during the presidential campaign, being on the road, talking to a lot of people for a year and a half. And we had good responses from the campuses, and that was pretty exciting for me because I didn't know how the reaction would be, because I went in a campaign and started talking about what I believed in, and it really is quite different than what others talk about, because so many others usually come in and say, well, this is what I'm going to do for you, what do you want, and that sort of approach. And my approach has been a little bit different, and that is that I think what we lack in this country is we lack an emphasis on individual freedom. We need more freedom in this country. We don't need more government telling you what to do with your lives, and that has been my goal in the campaign. But to my amazement, after the campaign, which ended last year, that there's been a lot of momentum continuing, because I had talked so much not only about foreign policy, but I talked a lot about financial conditions in this country. But not only during that campaign, but for years, I have been talking about economic policy. It was economic policy that got me involved in politics. In the introduction, it was mentioned I was a physician and delivered a lot of babies down in the Lake Jackson, Freeport area. But during the time I was in college, I didn't have a whole lot of interest in politics. By the time I got to medical school, I got interested in reading and studying not politics as much as studying economics. And I came across Austrian economics. And I became convinced that Austrian economics was on the right track, had the right understanding, the right predictions, and all the things they talked about in the 60s came about in the 1970s, that there would be a breakdown of the Bretton Woods monetary system, that we would have recessions, and we would have inflation, and I became so firmly convinced that they were correct. So it was more or less on a lark that in 1974, I told my wife that I was going to run for Congress, and she looked at me a little bit crazy, like, what are you going to do that for? And I said, I just have to get some things off my chest and talk about what I think's going wrong. And she said, well, it could be very dangerous, if you run for Congress. And I said, now, how could it be dangerous running for Congress? She says, you could end up getting elected. And but I assured her that that was impossible because of my approach to politics and economics, and that it was not conventional. But she said, well, I think that people, even then, they were interested in hearing somebody tell the truth about what was happening. And lo and behold, I did get elected, but didn't really want to stay in politics. And that's why I went back to medicine in 1984 and stayed in medicine for 12 years. But then once again got interested in running again, because I thought the country was ready. By 1994, there was a conservative movement in this country toward less government and reform, and I thought, well, maybe they're serious about this, and so lo and behold, I was successful in '96, and Republicans took over. We took over the House, we took over the Senate, and we took over the presidency. And I figured, yeah, well, what have Republicans been talking about all these years? They're talking about limited government and balanced budgets. And in the year 2000, we were condemning nation building and policing the world. And I thought, wow, this is great stuff. But when you look back now at the past 8, 10, 12 years, what do we have? I mean, we have bigger government, bigger deficit, a horrible economy, a foreign policy that is based on building an empire, which we can't afford. We can't afford any of it. And it's all at the expense of the next generation. It happens to be the year of the next generation. And this is what you're getting. You're getting all the debt. You're getting a currency that doesn't work. You're getting a system that's going to give us a lot of inflation. You're inheriting a system that seems to have so little respect for civil liberties, for your privacy, and for your own life. And to have the government telling you what you do every single day, every single thing you eat and drink and smoke and where you go and what you do and what you see. It's the nanny state. And there's so little excitement about just being a free individual and a limited government, something that's what drove the founders of this country to have a system of government where the government was very limited. The unique thing about our revolution was that it was one of the rare, if maybe not the only one, where the people came out with more freedom rather than less. There's been a lot of revolutions throughout history, but usually it's a revolution between authoritarians, and usually the biggest authoritarian, the strongest wins and the people lose. But that was different in our revolution. But sadly, that experiment, I think, has been exhausted. And my goal has always been to revive that spirit. And the good news is that I have met a lot of people who do care and do understand it and are ready to listen and realize that the system that we have today has failed. It has failed. It has failed to deliver the goods. It has failed in having the perfect welfare system, that everybody has good health care and whatever, and the perfect school system, and the perfect foreign policy that is non-controversial. And it's failed in the sense that it's paid for by borrowed money. We've been turned turned away from being producers to consumers. And how can we afford to consume? We just borrow the money or print the money. So it's a system that has been going on now for a good many decades. It hasn't been just since the early 70s. There was a major event in 1971 where the monetary system that was set up in 44 and at the time was predicted to fail and did. But this has been insidious. This has been going on for well over 100 years, where the concern for and the belief in and the confidence in a free society has essentially been lost. And but now there is a real challenge because so many people are starting to wake up and say, you know, it wasn't much of a concern because it looked like we were all prospering. We all had jobs, and jobs were automatic, and it seemed like the country was getting wealthier. But now the country and the world has awakened to find out that it was based on an illusion. It was more like if you were able to go to the bank and borrow $20,000 a month, and you didn't have to work. $20,000 a month you could live on, and the bank does that, and you live that way for 5 or 10 years, and the bank actually increases it where you say, well, I'd like $40,000 a month. Okay, give you $40,000 a month. You have unlimited resources and what you can buy, and you enjoy all this luxuries. But then the bank says, no more, you can't borrow anymore. So all that wealth that appeared to be wealth was all borrowed money. And then if the individual has overborrowed, overspent, and overextended, the individual has to say, holy man, in order to survive, I got to pay the debt? So the bank says, yeah, you have to pay the debt. I'm not going to loan you any more money. You mean I have to get a job? Yeah, you have to get a job. You have to work harder, and you have to pay the debt down and get back on your feet again. Most people can understand that, but that can happen to a nation too. And we were lucky in one way that for years we were living off others because this quirk in the monetary system allowed us to print the gold. When they got rid of the gold standard, they allowed the dollar to replace the gold. But we got to print the gold, and everybody was taking the gold. And that allowed us to get away with this for a long, long time, and that's why our jobs went overseas. Our great export has been the dollar. I mean, why work hard as a country if you can print the money? if you'd come across a printing press, which was the authentic printing press, not just a counterfeit printing press, but the authentic printing press, but you had control of it. You had, well, if I do this carefully, I'm just going to print this money. I can live this way for the rest of my life. Well, that's essentially what we did until the point was that we took advantage of it and just printed money like crazy. And who did the work? Well, the poor people in China did the work. And now, guess what? The Chinese have nearly $1 trillion of our money. And that money is out of the country, which means we don't have as much inflation. All the money is over there in different places. Saudi Arabia has it because we bought oil at discount. But now, the important thing to recognize about this past year is that has ended. It is ended, and you're not going back to it. They talk about it. You'll read about it. You who are studying international politics will be talking. You'll hear about them. Oh, well, can they revive the old Bretton Woods system? Well, but they're not going to. The Bretton Woods system was from 44 to 71, and it broke down, and it's gone. And from 71 up until 2007, we had a fiat dollar standard, which kept the system, the world together, and allowed us to inflate like no other country has ever done in the history of the world. And that system has ended. That is the message that you have to listen to in this past year. And this delivers to you a real mess. And you say, well, how did this all come about? Why did we allow this to happen? Well, we didn't have respect for the Constitution because the Constitution wouldn't permit it. The Constitution says there can be only gold and silver as legal tender. There is no welfare state under the Constitution. There is no warfare state, no policing of the world. Some of them even believe we shouldn't even have standing armies back then. And the whole thing has been totally out of control because of lack of respect for the law, lack of respect for local government. Everything has to be central. Nothing can be taken care of without the federal government. The federal government has to take care of medical care and through the education and protect you against everybody and everything. And then, of course, we have periods of times that are crises and the people become very, very fearful. And then that further exacerbates the problem because then there's a gigantic growth of government. There are two things, economic crises and international crises. World War I, an absolutely, in my viewpoint, unnecessary war for us to have been involved in, and literally set the stage for the 20th century and World War II and all the mess that we have. But how did it come about? How did we pay for it? Well, first you had to have the Federal Reserve System, which was not authorized by the Constitution. They create the Federal Reserve, they create the IRS, they tax the people, they inflate the currency, they have a World War I, which was catastrophic for the world, and then they come and finally we end that, but we lose a bunch of liberties then. Then we have the inflation of the 20s, and then we have an economic catastrophe in the 30s, fearful, well, we have to have a safety net for everybody. So they usher in the New Deal in the age of welfareism. And more recently, you'll remember, which was another major crisis. Of course, we had, the economic crisis of the 70s as well as World War II. But the 9/11 incident, an absolutely tragic incident that just terrified the American people to the point where do whatever is necessary, spend whatever you have to, invade anybody you think you need to invade, but take care of us and make us safe. First, we have the government making you safe economically, and now you want the government to make us safe physically. So yes, invade how many more countries you need to invade. Don't ask why 9/11 happened, who was the cause and what was the problem. Just go invade more countries. And to be safe at home, sure. What we need is more laws. We need the Patriot Act, and we need to get rid of the rule of law. We need to start torturing people. We need to have secret renditions and on with no respect at all for individual liberty. Get rid of habeas corpus. These are the kind of things that have been going on. So it's been the total rejection of what all that has made America great. So we are now at this crisis point. Not so much that people have realized the deeply flawed foreign policy we have, and not because they've looked and said, well, it's a constitutional crisis or it's a monetary crisis. What they're saying now is, oh, well, we have a slump. We have an economic crisis, and we have to take care of the people. So therefore, we have to bail out everybody, and that's in the news all day long about what we're supposed to be doing in Washington. If $100 billion doesn't work, you pass $800 billion. If that doesn't work, another $800 billion, which is another $1 trillion. And if that doesn't work, you ask the Federal Reserve to do it secretly with no supervision or surveillance by the Congress, and they create trillions of dollars because they're panicked into solving this problem with no concern and no understanding that they're embarking on a course that will inevitably destroy the dollar, which will mean with the destruction of the dollar, the crisis will be many folds greater than anything that you've seen so far with the financial system collapsing. It's when the dollar collapses. So what do we do about all this? I think the problem is easy to describe. Matter of fact, I think the answer is pretty easy. And we got here because we had no respect for our Constitution, no respect for the rule of law. And if we want to solve our problems, all we have to do is respect the rule of law and respect our traditions, believe in freedom, believe in property rights, believe in contracts, believe in the limited role of government to protect your liberty, don't believe in the nanny state, don't believe in welfare, warfare, socialism. And that could be reversed. If we did that, you'd have about a year or two of tough times, and it would be all over, and we would be a free country again. The trouble is, the people who believe that are small in number, and they're not in Washington, D.C. But the people who believe in this, those numbers are growing by leaps and bounds, and those are the people that I've met and talked to over the last couple of years, and that's where I'm very, very encouraged. I am encouraged by your age group, or the number of people who now are starting to talk about the Federal Reserve System, and it has to be talked about. But we have to talk about foreign policy, because it's the foreign policy and the need for the welfare system that has to be paid for. It's being paid for by first the income tax, which we didn't have that in our Constitution. We don't need it if you have a free society. You don't need an income tax. But you can't have this runaway government without a cartel monopoly control of the monetary system, which has been around for thousands of years, where the king always has control of the money, control of the coins, debase the currency, clip the coins, inflate the currency to fight these wars and do all the things that they do. That is how it gets paid for. And then those who like this idea of running the world, have a free hand, especially when they can get away with it for so long. And that's what's happened for these last 35 years. We really haven't had to pay any of the bills. But the foreign policy, when I went to Congress, I was mainly interested in economic policy and monetary policy. In the last decade or so, and since I've been back to Congress, I have gotten much more interested in foreign policy. But they're connected, because we have to pay for the foreign policy either through taxation or through inflation. And right now it's mostly through inflation. If you didn't have that inflation, then we couldn't be the policeman of the world. I don't think we should be the policeman of the world. I think it's the worst thing in the world for our national security, and that is to have our policy that we should be telling other people what to do. I think it's very, very simple. I don't think the government should tell you what you should do with your life. Your life is your own. You should have the liberty to use it as you see fit. You have no right to hurt anybody else or meddle in other people's affairs. But if you mess your own life, that's your business and nobody else's. But you can't ask people to take care of it. I don't think the government should be running the economy, because believe me, I've met a few of those guys up there. They don't have the vaguest idea how to run the economy, and they don't have any idea how to spend your money. And here they're spending money you don't even have yet. These hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars that they're spending. But by what right do we have to tell other countries how to live? Oh, you say, well, there's a bunch of bad guys out there, and we got to get rid of those bad guys. Yeah, what about this bad guy in Iraq? I mean, this Saddam Hussein, he was a monster, and he was likely to attack America. And one time when we were debating the authority to go into Iraq, I said that, why are we doing this? They've never attacked us. Iraq has never attacked us. We have no moral authority to start invading Iraq. And one of the members got up and he says, what is the congressman talking about? They've been committing aggression against us for 10 years now. And I said, well, what do you mean that Iraq has been committing aggression against the United States for 10 years? He says, well, every time we go over there and bomb them, they keep shooting at our airplanes. And he called that aggression. Of course, they're shooting with rifles. They never hit one airplane. They didn't have a Navy. They didn't have an Air Force, and they couldn't. They couldn't do a thing. It was absolutely impossible for them to defend themselves. And you know, when this subject came up when Clinton was in power and Albright was Secretary of State. She was asked on national television, do you know that there are 500,000 Iraqi children that have died because of our policies of the blockade, no food and medicine? She said that may be true, but that's just the way it is, if that's the price we have to pay. I mean, that is our foreign policy. Yes, he was a monster, but we had no authority to go in there. So what has happened? So 9/11 comes along. 9/11, and I'm sure if you've been paying any attention, you know what my opinion is on that, because that to me is a reflection of the fact that we're in their face. What would we do if we were being bombed, or we were setting up puppet governments, or somebody else was putting puppet governments in our system? This is a reflection of the hatred directed toward us because we set up puppet governments in the Middle East. Secular governments that offend ultra-religious people. Their problems are their problems, but that's one of the major reasons. The support for Israel over the Palestinian, it's well known and it's clear. That makes people a bit upset. And sometimes people go to war for natural resources. And I understand there's a barrel or two of oil over there. And that's another reason why we're over there. They know it, but the American people didn't know it on 9/11, that we were doing all these things. So it was a predictable event. The predictions have been laid out about the possibility of terrorism as a reflection, because it's been going on in increments over the many decades. And so what do? The president comes in and said, well, we need authority to go into Afghanistan and go look for the bad guys. And the immediate reaction, and I did support that position, that we should look for the people who actually perpetuated this, even though I thought it was a natural consequence of the policy. I still think there's a limit to how far you can go. So I said, yeah, go do this. But so they claimed that it was Osama bin Laden. Probably was. They knew where he was. They had him captured or in an area where they thought they could get him. They backed off. They let him go, escape into Pakistan. So they say, but the neoconservatives said, wow, what an opportunity. Now we can have our war in Iraq. They've been planning the war for years. I mean, Paul O'Neill, in his first cabinet meeting with the president, before 9/11, the first cabinet meeting came out, when are we going to hit Iraq? When are we going to invade Iraq? So they immediately took funds that were allotted to going after Osama bin Laden, and used them to start the build-up, the military build-up, and then for the next year, of course, they worked on getting some type of authority from the Congress. Not a declaration of war. As far as I'm concerned, it was illegal and immoral to do it. But then we invaded Iraq. So, okay, we lost almost 3,000 on 9/11, so we have to pay back. We haven't caught the people that did it. I think most of them are dead that did it. So what did we do? We went into Iraq. We had already acknowledged that 500,000 children died because of our policies from the first Persian Gulf War up until 9/11. So during that time, since the invasion, there's been 1 million Iraqi people killed. Oh, they were all terrorists. Yeah, sure, they were all terrorists. So then what do? Well, we decide that we're going to find the bad guy. So we offer $1 million for anybody over there that will turn in one of the bad guys. So guess what? There are a lot of bad guys over there. And we took them and put them in torture chambers. And they're still there. And we paid people to squeal on their enemies, and then we beat them up to make them talk about something they probably don't even know. Does that mean there aren't some really, really bad people in Guantanamo? Probably there are some really bad ones. But what do? Do you torture 500 because there's 5 people in there that might have some information? Besides, that whole issue of torture really doesn't work. So this whole thing, what it does, it undermines us as a people, and it undermines our rule of law, this idea that American citizens have been down there, right? Undermines the process, and what we are supposed to be doing is protecting this process. But since we've gone into Iraq, we've lost 5,000 Americans. A little over 4,200 in Iraq, but we've lost the war. This is the same war, the one that is in Afghanistan. We lost several hundred there. We've lost a lot. Half the people over there aren't even in the military. They're contractors. And there's been contractors killed over there. And of course, it isn't ending in Iraq. And it isn't ending in Afghanistan. You're inheriting a war that's picking on Pakistan now. We're going to be in Pakistan. We are in Pakistan. And the only saving grace might be that we'll run out of money soon enough that we'll come to our senses and that we'll have to come home. But we've lost 5,000 Americans, so that's a fair trade-off. We lose 3,000, so we kill 5,000 more Americans, and they think this is some trade-off. Well, they come to attack us because we're free and prosperous. So we undermine our freedoms and we destroy our prosperity. I don't think that's going to work either. I mean, it doesn't make any sense on what we're doing. 40,000 plus military personnel now are suffering loss of limbs, loss of legs, blinded people, post-traumatic stress syndrome, brain injuries. It's going to go on and on and on. And they think there's a victory over there. And what about the people in Iraq? They have there's been over 1 million of them killed. There are $4.5 million Iraqis that have been displaced. They've been pushed out. As bad as Saddam Hussein was, he at least protected the Christians over there. They live there. They live next to a lot of Muslims. But half of the Christians have had to leave because of the chaos. And they've gone out. There's over 1 million widows over there, and there are 5 million orphans. Nobody's returning to Iraq. People who are coming back in there, they're not. The people who went to Jordan, do you think they're going to walk back in and their house is going to be there and they're going to move back in? None of that happens. So this whole thing that we've had this major victory and the surge worked, it is total nonsense. It has nothing to do with reality. It's a mess over there, and the odds of us leaving. Now, Obama had a better rhetoric in the campaign. He said, bring the troops home in 16 months. Well, I don't believe in betting, but I will wager you that the troops won't be gone in 16 months unless this country is so broke that we'll have to. No, they're not going to come home. And if they do come home, the discussion now within the Obama administration is we will redesignate, combat troops and then call them standby troops. You will redesignate them and say, oh, it'll make it sound like we don't have as many combat troops. That's the kind of talk that goes on. But we have at one time we had 16 air bases and military bases there. We probably still have 12. And we have the biggest embassy of all the world, as big as the Vatican in Baghdad. Cost you $1 billion. At the same time, you can't get enough money to take care of flood victims in this country. We're building billion-dollar embassies around the world. They're not going to close that down. We are a country that asks our people and take their tax money, and that's you, to take bombs and bomb people, kill people, blow up their bridges. Then we feel badly about it. So we go over and rebuild their bridges. So we send billions of dollars over there to rebuild it. And guess what? There's corruption when they get the money, and the money never gets to the right people. At the same time, our bridges are falling down in this country. The policy is absolutely nuts. And yet people go marching on and marching on. Recently we saw a lot of Palestinians killed. Now, I don't take a position on that. I'm not pro-Israel or anti-Israel. I'm not pro-Palestinian or anti-Palestinian. I'm pro-American. I say mind our own business, treat everybody equally, trade with everybody, and try to get along with people. But those Palestinians were killed by weapons and money from you. So you have a moral responsibility for it, and our government feels that way. There's a little bit of law now. The bridges and infrastructure has been blown up again in this concentration camp, and they have to rebuild it. So we've already sent them foreign aid to help rebuild, after we were financing all the destruction. That policy, your generation will have to be honest with yourselves and decide, is that what we like? Or is this what we do? Do we have a neocon philosophy that says that we have to spread, they do this in the name of spreading America's goodness. I mean, can you imagine all this going on in telling people how good we are? Oh, we're not interested in oil. Yeah, we're not interested, and we don't have any special favors of it. We do give a lot to Israel, but we give the same amount. If you had all that we give and all the weapons, everything we provide to the Arab nations, it's about even. So I think it's an even break. Let's cut it off from both sides. That's what I think we ought to do. We have a political system today that we have a one-party system. Democrats and Republicans are the same. Oh, no, you say that's not true. That's not true, because Republicans are conservatives and they're for the balanced budget. And the Democrats are against the wars, and they'll bring the troops home. But really, it comes together. It blends together. Policies don't change. The rhetoric's a little bit different. And I don't know when it happened that they came together. But I think what did happen is that the Republicans have picked up the worst parts of what the Democrats believed in, and the Democrats picked up the worst parts of what the Republicans believed in. And then they all get together, and now the best parts of what the Republicans had and the best parts of what the Democrats believed in, everybody's forgotten about it. And they each do have, we still do hear some things. I have some good allies in Washington when we talk about civil liberties and personal privacy and allowing you to use the internet and never have the government regulate the internet, allowing you to decide what you want to do with your own body. I have some good allies there, but they're in the minority on their side. But someday, what the country has to do is wake up and pick up the good parts of what the Republicans claim they believe in, the good parts of what the Democrats claim they believe in, and put it back together. Something happened 100 years ago or so where the concept of freedom got chopped into two pieces. One, we started calling it economic liberty, and one, it was personal liberty. Liberals tended to say, well, personal liberty, we like this idea, lifestyles and all that. We like that, but We don't believe that you're smart enough to know how to spend your money. We have to protect you against the market economy. And but the other half, conservatives, say, well, no, we believe in the marketplace. But the bottom line is that neither of them do a very good job in protecting your civil liberties. Neither side protects your economic liberty. And both sides endorse this foreign policy of empire. And it has gotten especially bad since the Soviets have disappeared, because now we have this moral obligation. Well, if we're not the policeman, who's going to be the policeman? We have this moral obligation to take care of the world. Well, like I said, the problems are great. I think the problems are not difficult to understand. The understanding comes from the knowledge of what freedom is all about and what responsibility is about and where you get your freedoms, and that freedoms aren't coming to you from the government. They come to you in a natural way. They don't come to you if you say that, well, I belong to such and such group and therefore I need special help from the government. I'm a woman and we have to have women's rights. I am a minority, we have to have minority rights. I am a gay person and I have to have gay rights. That's all nonsense. You don't get rights because you belong to a group. The only group that gains rights are individuals. The state has no rights. And in court cases, you'll frequently hear, well, the state's interests are at stake here and we have to protect the state. No, the state responsibility to do but one thing, and that's protect your life. So that when your neighbor comes to harm you or steal from you, yes, there's a responsibility of the government. The more local, the better. It's when you come to understand the beautiful results of individual liberty, self-reliance, responsibility for oneself, property rights. And if you look at history, if you look at all the statistics, if you measure countries by how much freedom they have, and they have these statistics all the time. This country is an absolutely authoritarian government, and this one is the freest society. Do you know what? The freest society is always the most prosperous society. We are becoming less free and we are becoming less prosperous. And we are not the most prosperous. And because we are resorting to more authoritarianism than ever before, we are going to continue to get a lot poorer. All the things that people want from government. First, government has nothing. But if they want to be helped, if they want to be educated, if they want free medical care, if they want to impose our will someplace around the world, or they want you to be a better person, all of that comes from the use of force. And when government uses force, that is a monopoly, a control of power that they don't deserve and they shouldn't have. It is the use of force which creates this, and some people in Washington love it. They enjoy it, and they also believe it's necessary because there are too many dumb people out there that don't know how to take care of themselves. They might go out and smoke something they shouldn't be smoking, so their only government can take care of them. And they might waste their money. They might decide to gamble on weekend and play poker or go to the races. Oh no, we better not do that. And they'll go on and on all these things. The assumption being made that government force is necessary because the people are dumb and that they won't take care of themselves. And if people were free to run their own lives, that the world would be chaotic. Well, now the evidence is in, and this is the story. The evidence is in, and it's flopped right on your laps because the results are there. We've had plenty of government for the last 100 years in this country and throughout the world, and it doesn't look good. So your choice is, do you think you can keep it going just about this way and maintain the amount of prosperity we have, and maybe a job will come along? Or should we have more government? Was it the lack of regulation that caused our financial crisis? Oh, we knew more government, more spending, more taxes, more inflation, which is what they're doing. They're in charge. Or if you decide that, what we really need is more confidence in ourselves, a better understanding on how freedom works, and work toward protecting a free society. I mean, that's the decision you have. And in making this decision, you have to ask about one question: what should the role of government be? And if you say the role of government should be very limited, it should be for the protection of liberty, it shouldn't be for running our lives, it shouldn't be for policing the world, and it shouldn't be for running the economy. And you say, well, okay, then the government should be very, very small. We don't need an income tax. We don't ever need to inflate the currency. We don't need the business cycle. And will it be a perfect world? Far from it. There'll be a lot of problems. There's going to be some people that need help. But just think, it looks like we have a healthy crowd here. Just think if every one of you took care of yourselves, because I came and I said to you, if I represent the government, say, look, you're on your own, but you don't have to pay any more income taxes ever. And you don't have to pay any more Social Security into a fund. You're not going to get anything out of it. And you all of a sudden went out there and you say, I think that would be good. Yes, somebody can get sick. Somebody might have medical needs and you might not get the insurance. But, you know, it hasn't been that long ago. In the 1960s, when I was drafted in the Air Force, I did some moonlighting in San Antonio. I used to work for $3 an hour in a church hospital before Medicaid and Medicare, and nobody ever got turned away. Nobody was even asked if they had insurance. I treated everybody that came through the door, and people who could pay, they paid. And there nobody laying out on the sidewalks without medical care. It's this assumption that if the government didn't do this, you wouldn't have it. But there would be ways the country would be wealthier. You'd have many, many more Bill Gateses of the world. There would be a tremendous amount of wealth. And this is where the hospitals would come from. The churches, once again, would run the hospitals. And it does work. This propaganda that it would all collapse without the government, force and violence to take from one and give to another, to have a fair society and a perfectly behaved community because there'll be no moral misbehavior. I mean, it's all a fallacy. So I come with the good news is that it's not that difficult to solve. It's just to believe in freedom, follow the Constitution. The rough time we're having now, it could be over in a year or two. But if we don't change our ways, if we continue to do what we're doing now, exactly as we did in the Depression, this go around it's going to be a lot worse. So there's a lot at stake. It's on your lap, unfortunately. But the encouragement I got throughout the country was that so many in your age group know exactly what's going on and realize it, and you're starting to feel it, and you know what you have to do. All I want to do is encourage you, because there's every reason to believe that we can get over this and get past this, because we have great traditions. We at least remember, and our history tells us, unlike the Soviet system and some other oppressive regimes, they don't have the history that we have of private property and sound money. And therefore, it isn't as difficult for us to reverse our trends. But it is very necessary that we do this very soon. So I come to you really with a sense of optimism, but also that of urgency, that we can do this, we can solve it, and that it will take a lot of study. You have to understand economics. You have to be able to explain economics in a way that saying that freedom is the only compassionate system. They say, well, I lack compassion. I'm not going to take care of anybody. But, you know, the system doesn't work. People won't be taken care of. They're not being taken care of right now. So the compassionate system, where you have production and prosperity, is with a free society. And that is why the system works. I mean, there are all other kind of reasons that you could argue, but it really is the compassionate system. And that is the system that I believe in. We need to believe in ourselves and believe in our country and believe in freedom. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Congressman Paul will be taking some questions now, so you guys can just come up There's a microphone here, a microphone over there. So come on up.
Representative Paul, thank you so much for coming out tonight. As a sitting member of Congress, what sort of solution would you support in terms of dealing with the current detainees in Guantanamo Bay and other...
Wait, what was the first word? With what?
With the current detainees, what solution would you support in dealing with, what judicial solution would you support in dealing with the detainees in Guantanamo Bay and also other terrorists or suspected terrorists held in the future or abroad in extra rendition sort of situations?
Okay, I get the gist about the Guantanamo, but you're also, that was in and out. Guantanamo and torture.
Yeah, no, okay. So what sort of judicial solution would you support in terms of dealing with current detainees at Guantanamo?
Okay.
Or others held abroad in extra...
Yeah. It's not real easy because the argument will be, let's say they admit to having 3,000. Who knows? We don't know because they're secret. The principle's wrong, so I'd want to change it and get rid of it. But you say, well, what are you going to do with the 3,000? Because there might be 500 in there that are just itching, to do us a great deal of harm. When they're the secret ones in secret countries and all, I think we just have to leave them and let that country take care of them. We're changing policies. We're not running those things anymore. And that's the other thing. We get rid of the Guantanamo. You don't get rid of torture unless you get rid of what the CIA had been done even before Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. They were just farming it out. They were subcontracting it to some of these countries, which I think is bad policy. But we'll try to narrow it down to Guantanamo. Let's say there's 10% are, the really bad people. Well, if they have the evidence, they should be tried in our courts. I mean, we tried the people who bombed the towers, in the first go around, and they all went to jail. These guys, terrorists is a bad term. These are thugs and hoodlums and bombers and all. But this whole idea that we have a war on terrorism is a mere tactic. But I think some of them, if you don't have the evidence, I think you have to just send them back where you got them. Some countries might not want them, but we have to end it. We have to end it. And I don't know of any better way. But the difficulty in solving these problems is not proof that our arguments are flawed as much as those who created the problems are the ones that shouldn't have done it, and it's very difficult to solve this. But you should do it with the idea the most important thing is to protect the rule of law, that American citizens won't ever be treated that way. And a couple American citizens have been treated that way. That's the greatest threat. So some of the guilty might get released, but what if we save a whole, judicial system? That's probably the most important thing we do.
Thank you.
I know this is a pretty broad question, but how would you, I was wondering, how would you change the current U.S. drug policy if you could?
Drug policy?
Yes.
I'd get rid of the drug war. I'd just close it down. Obama had made some positive statements about this, that they wouldn't be raiding these places where they go off and smoke. But they've already done it since he said he was going to stop it, but they didn't stop. They're still doing it. And I want to put my disclaimer on is that I think all those drugs are horrible. And I don't want to deal with them. I advise people not to use them. But prescription drugs are probably 10 times or 100 times worse than the illegal drugs, So it's a personal choice. But I would argue that the federal drug war is what I have responsibility for, so I vote against all of it and argue the case against it. But then it becomes a states' rights issue. Let's say California and other states are trying to move back and say, look, and this is just a small token. If you happen to be sick and you're dying, a doctor can write you a prescription because they're compassionate conservatives. You're going to allow, okay. They'll say that they can have marijuana. Then the federal government comes in and overrules the state laws and arrests them anyway and puts sick people in jail. This is done. We've wasted $100 billion, over the last 30 years. Maybe it's more than that. But it's a huge amount of money. And once again, what does it do? It undermines the rule of law. I mean, just think of all the intrusion of privacy and the principle that you don't know what to do with your own life because you might mess it up. Well, that's true. You might mess it up. But this whole idea that the government knows what's best for us. But no, I think the federal war on drugs should be ended.
Dr. Paul, thank you very much for coming here. Can you comment on the stimulus package that's recently coming out and describe, since you're in Congress, how are your fellow politicians being influenced by certain groups? What have you noticed?
How are they being what?
How are they being influenced by certain groups?
Oh, influenced. Yeah, well, they're influenced by the people who donate money to them, and if some money is allotted to their district, that is it. And they're influenced, and they're also influenced by fear. Fear after 9/11 is the reason the Patriot Act was passed. Fear of the Depression was the reason they introduced the welfare state. And right now, people are very, very fearful. The first $700 billion, it went down. And then the Secretary of Treasury and others got together, and they just took those guys and said, do you realize what's happening? The world's going to end unless you vote for this. Well, they voted for it, and the financial world still ended, So it didn't do any good. So it's all groups. It'll be bankers and builders and just everybody. And but they're reflecting a flawed policy because it is true that probably 99% of individuals in Washington, certainly in the executive branch of government, are Keynesians. They believe that if you don't spend the money, you can't get out of a recession, where actually the opposite is true. It's okay to spend money, but you should be spending the money by making sure you don't have to pay any taxes. And evidently our new Secretary of Treasury doesn't think much about paying taxes either. I don't know.
They don't pay taxes.
And he's pretty wealthy.
I wonder why.
They're all crooks. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for coming to speak. And I enjoy watching, I guess every month or so, when you give Bernanke a spanking at the I watch those on YouTube. I like those. But and thank you for your crusade against the Federal Reserve System. I'd just like to say that today's young people aren't dumb, and even with the propaganda they get at a Ivy League thing like this, and they've seen the evidence. The evidence is on is on the internet that 9/11 was an inside job. The thing we know about 9/11 is that it was not only convenient for the administration and allowed them to pass the Patriot Act, go to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. As you said, those plans had already been talked about. But it wasn't only convenient, but we know, based on the fact that there are so many lies and anomalies in the official story, that hundreds of professors, engineers, architects, excuse me?
Google question, please.
Oh. You kind of stopped my rhythm there. But anyway, so the question would be, what do you think about that, given that I know that it's hard, maybe that you can't talk about it, but I know Dennis Kucinich has called for a new investigation of 9/11. So has Arizona State Senator Karen Johnson, and I know it's I guess it's hard for government people to step in and say we'd like an investigation, but I'd like your thoughts on that. Thank you. The question is, does Dr. Paul support an investigation of 9/11?
Yeah, I would support it. It's not going to happen. There's no move in that direction, but I do not believe the investigation was adequate and satisfactory. I do not share the view that people in high position in Washington knew exactly what was happening. I don't see the evidence for that. But I also know that all investigations are designed to cover up ineptness. And I think that's why the very few people trust the 9/11 investigation.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. It's really cool that you would come and speak to me and to all these people in here. You educated us on certain things that researched a lot, and I wanted to let everyone know to check out Infowars.com with Alex Jones. He supports Ron Paul. So if you want more information about what he's talking about and educate yourself, check it out. Also, you spoke of Palestine and Israel for a little bit, and I don't like my tax dollars going to that either. And I want you to just tell us, like, what is the first step for us to do to get that to stop happening, in supporting Israel?
It's easier said than done. But since you brought up a web page, it reminded me that I would like to mention my web page on following up. I usually forget. I'm always criticized by myself. Why don't you ever mention our web page? So I thought you were going to mention my web page. No, but if now I'll forget the question. But our web page is Campaign for Liberty, and you can follow up on our activities. And you want to know how we can stop the money going to foreign aid. When Republicans generally take the position no foreign aid, but when Bush and got in office, they like doubled the amount of foreign aid. Unless you have a whole new Congress, it's not going to happen. It is so well entrenched. It's part of the military-industrial complex. It's part of the foreign policy. We have to have a new foreign policy. If you agree with my foreign policy and and your kind of people get into Congress, then the foreign aid is going to quit. But right now, it's going to quit only when the empire ends, and that is when we go broke, which who knows? It might not be all that far off. So maybe it'll be sooner than we think.
Last question.
Thank you for coming to speak to us tonight. During your talk, you focused a lot about the negative aspects of international government involvement, such as high death rates of Iraqi citizens or lack of ability to foster Middle Eastern peace. I'm wondering if you think that we have any moral obligation for citizens who have experienced moral atrocities, such as Rwanda in 1994 or Darfur now. Do we have any sort of economic or military obligation to help these people who are being murdered?
Yes, I think that's a real good question. It's a real good question for people who are full-fledged constitutionalists and libertarians, because the authority really isn't there on how you handle that and what you do about it. Because we all should have compassion, and I think we should do something on an individual basis. And if we were a free and prosperous nation and had 1,000 Bill Gateses around, and he's already, sends money over there, there'd be so much more wealth that these people could be helped. But I would never, no matter how bad it was, if there's a civil war going on over in Africa, I would never take your money, and I would never draft anybody, and I would never send the military over there. And we do a lot of it, more than sometimes they complain, well, you'll go for Iraq because of the oil, but we don't do the other. But we do it, and we send, a lot of times we'll send humanitarian aid, we'll send food, and it'll go through the UN. But you know what? Even that backfires. It goes in and it's taken over by a warlord, and it's used, and it never gets to the people. And whoever's the strongest military power gets the food, and it compounds the problem. The only thing that solves that is if we export one thing, and we have to practice it, and that is the principles of freedom and the marketplace. That's what will solve those problems. But I would not send money there. I do not think that is proper. The only thing that I do concede to is there's a lot of things that Washington is doing that we should have never done. But in the interim, I would support some of those positions. Let's say we're not taking care of enough of the kids, and the kids need some more medical care. I would, if we could cut $10 billion out of going into, bombing Pakistan, I would put $5 billion against the deficit, and I'd put $5 billion here at home for something. And I would even consider doing that if you didn't do a trade-off. If your choice is bombing and killing people, and you can cut enough to save money, at the same time take some of that money and put it in humanitarian aid, I would say that is a better way of doing it. That would be my opinion, that it would be better, even though there are shortcomings. And I've seen and heard too many how this food is used just as a weapon, against the poor. But I think you could work out that. But the mental status has to change, that you can't spend money you don't have. You have to cut it from some way. And why not? And the top of my list is the warmongering stuff. That's where I would cut. Like I mentioned in the talk, I would quit blowing up bridges and pretending to rebuild bridges overseas. And even though it's not a federal function to take care of our roads and highways here at home, I would do it. That would be the transition, because I'm not going to see my perfect constitutional free society, but that's the way I would do it, which means that if the conditions were right, I would support it. Okay, thank you very much.